Today's story is about a husband who got handed a free pass and actually used it. His wife sat him down one night, held his hands like she was delivering news he should be grateful for, and told him she needed freedom. Other connections, room to grow. She assumed he'd wait quietly while she figured herself out with the help of her life coach. What she did not expect was for him to call a divorce attorney that same night. What she really didn't expect was to see him, months later, visibly lighter, clearly happy, and completely done. This one is for every man who got underestimated by someone who thought they were doing him a favor. My wife said, "I want to start an open marriage. Do whatever you want." So, I did exactly that. She thought it would destroy me. I should start with the part people always gloss over. The slow part, where nothing dramatic happens, but everything quietly falls apart anyway. Clara joined a women's empowerment group about a year and a half before any of this exploded. At first, it seemed harmless. Self-help books, online workshops, weekend seminars about setting boundaries, and letting go of old patterns. She'd been restless for a while, and I figured it was something she needed to work through on her own terms. I gave her space. I didn't push back. I thought that was the right move. Then she met Evan. He ran the sessions. Confident, polished, always had a profound take on why modern marriages collapse. Clara started quoting him constantly, at dinner, in the car, before bed. Marriages fail because people refuse to evolve. That was one of his lines, and she delivered it like it had been handed down on stone tablets. She used to call me out for being too practical, too grounded, too unwilling to think beyond what was comfortable. Evan apparently had a name for that. He called it resistance. I noticed the early warning signs long before I wanted to deal with what they meant. Her phone getting tilted away whenever a notification came in. Coming home past 2 in the morning, carrying the faint trace of a cologne I didn't recognize. Conversations getting shorter, less interested, less like she was actually talking to me, and more like she was just reporting in. The distance between us on the couch growing a little wider every week until we were practically sitting in different rooms. I told myself people go through phases. I told myself a lot of things. Then one evening, she sat across from me, took both my hands in hers like she was about to read me a verse, and told me she wanted to open our marriage. She framed it like a gift. She talked about freedom and connection and spiritual growth, said it wasn't about the physical, said it was about both of us becoming more complete as individuals. I asked her plainly, "So you want to sleep with other people?" She corrected me. "It's about growth, Ethan. That's what Evan says." "Right," I said. "So you keep the house, the shared accounts, everything we've built, and also the freedom to date whoever you want on the side." She told me I had the same freedom. "Do whatever you want, Ethan." I could tell this wasn't a discussion. She'd made the decision before she sat down. This was her paperwork. The part where she absolved herself before crossing a line she'd already decided to cross. So I said, "All right, go find yourself." She blinked. She'd expected a fight. Maybe begging. Something. I gave her nothing but a calm nod and the quiet sound of me going to bed. That night, I called a divorce attorney. I signed up for a gym. I opened a separate checking account and rerouted my direct deposit to it before my next paycheck hit. No announcement, no argument, just action. Hold on. Let me step in here real quick. For the listeners, this is me, the host, not the OP talking. Because I want to point out exactly what just happened. Most guys in this situation either explode, beg, or freeze completely. This one nodded, went to bed, and spent his evening restructuring his entire financial life. She thought the conversation was over when she stood up from the table. He was already 3 moves ahead. That gap, between how she understood the situation and how he was actually handling it, that is the whole story. Remember that, because it matters. Let's keep going. 2 months passed. Clara spent most of them working on herself, which meant spending most of her time with Evan. I spent mine at the gym, getting my paperwork in order, and quietly disentangling our finances without making a sound about it. The weight started coming off fast. I hadn't realized how much I'd been carrying until I started putting it down. Within 6 weeks, I was down 15 pounds and sleeping better than I had in years. I started cooking again. Actually cooking. Not just reheating stuff after long evenings of trying to hold a conversation that wasn't going anywhere. The house started feeling like mine again. instead of a place I was just occupying while waiting for something to change. Then my buddy Lucas invited me to a backyard barbecue. Lucas and I had stayed close since college. He worked in fraud compliance at a regional insurance firm, spent his days running background checks and tracking financial records, which gave him a sharp eye for the kind of people who aren't what they claim to be. His wife had a friend staying with them for the weekend, visiting from out of town. Her name was Mara. I wasn't there looking for anything. I was there for the food and the company, and that was genuinely it. But Mara was easy to talk to in a way that caught me off guard. No performance, no fishing for information, no constant redirecting of the conversation back to herself. She asked about my work, actually followed what I was saying, laughed at my jokes without forcing it. When she left, she handed me her number without making a whole thing out of it. At our first coffee, I laid everything on the table. "I'm still technically married," I said. "My wife wanted an open arrangement. We're waiting on the legal process." She tilted her head and asked what I actually wanted. "Not even close to any of this," I said. She smiled. "I appreciate the honesty," she said. "We built something simple over the next couple of months. Weekend walks, cooking together. Quiet evenings at my place with Cooper, my dog, who took to her immediately. Clara had always called that kind of life boring. The small routines, the early evenings, the low-key weekends. With Mara, it felt like I'd been running on empty for years, and someone had finally handed me something real. 4 months in, Clara noticed. She cornered me one evening. "You're different," she said. "Lighter, happier. Are you seeing someone?" I didn't answer. That was enough for her. Her voice sharpened. "Who is she?" I told her my choices were mine. She reminded me she was still my wife. I reminded her she was the one who handed me the free pass. She went quiet for a beat. That calculating look I'd seen 1,000 times. The one where she was running the numbers behind her eyes. Then she said she wanted to meet whoever it was. No. She said it wouldn't work without transparency. I almost laughed. Transparency from the woman who'd been coming home at 2 in the morning for 8 months. She kept pushing. "What does she do? Where did you meet her?" I leashed Cooper and walked out the door. The October air was cold and sharp. My phone buzzed while Cooper was sniffing a fence post. A text from Mara. "How was your day?" 3 words, no angle behind them. I called her. She answered fast and said I sounded tired. I told her Clara wanted to meet. Short pause on her end. Then, "What do you want?" That was Mara's thing. Always pulling the focus back to what I actually wanted. 7 years of marriage, and Clara had never once asked me that. I said part of me wanted to keep her far from the whole mess. The other part thought maybe a meeting was coming regardless. She said if I decided it was right, she'd do it, but on my terms, not Clara's. When I got home, I offered a dinner. All 4 of us. Me, Clara, Mara, and Evan. Clara stared at me like I'd just said something dangerous. Then she slowly agreed. Paused for a second. Because Mara's response to all of that is worth slowing down on. She wasn't anxious, wasn't political about it, didn't say, "I don't want any part of this." She asked one question. "What do you want?" That's it. No drama. She already understood exactly what she was looking at. A man who was completely done, working through a process. And she treated him accordingly. Now, Clara and Evan are about to show up for dinner. And neither one of them has any idea what they're walking into. The dinner was Saturday. I spent the morning cooking. Mushroom risotto, Caesar salad, apple tart. Focusing on the food helped keep everything quiet inside my head. Stirring, chopping, tasting. Something to do with my hands while the clock moved. Mara arrived at 6 sharp. Simple navy dress. Brown hair loose around her shoulders. In one hand, she had a box of dog treats for Cooper. In the other, a small box of chocolates for the table. She held both up when I opened the door and said she couldn't show up empty-handed. Before Clara came downstairs, Mara looked at me and said I looked good. "Smelled like garlic," she added, but in a good way. I kissed her once before I heard the sound of heels on the stairs. Clara came down in a red dress, full makeup, hair done, looking like she was walking into an awards ceremony. The comparison wasn't something I engineered. It was just there, immediate and unavoidable. Mara looked relaxed. Clara looked rehearsed. They introduced themselves. Clara extended a hand and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Mara matched it politely and mentioned she'd heard Clara was very dedicated to her career. Neutral. Completely neutral. Clara asked what Mara did. Mara said she ran a veterinary clinic downtown. Clara's smile tightened just slightly at the corners. She called it interesting in a tone that made it clear she found it anything but. Mara said she'd always loved animals, that it was rewarding work. Clara said her own work was more fast-paced. Mara said that sounded exhausting, having to always be chasing the next thing. It wasn't an insult, but it wasn't nothing either. Then Evan arrived. Tall, tan, black silk shirt, open 2 buttons too low. Practiced smile on full display. He walked in like the space belonged to him. Kissed Clara on the lips the moment he cleared the doorway. A flag planted. Then he turned to Mara and told her Clara had undersold her. Mara said, "You're exactly what I pictured." He laughed, visibly uncertain if that was a compliment. We sat down. The risotto came out right, creamy, well-seasoned. Even Clara, who usually picked at her food, went for seconds. Evan asked who made it. When I told him it was me, he said that was unusual for a man. Mara cut in before I could respond. She said cooking is basic survival, not a gender role. Evan chuckled and tried to backpedal. Said he just meant it was refreshing to see a man comfortable with non-traditional tasks. I told him I didn't see it as non-traditional. I see it as taking care of the people I love, I said. Clara's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. She said nothing, but I could see her processing that line from across the table. Evan pivoted. He asked Mara for her thoughts on open marriages. She said they can work for people who genuinely want them. He pushed. Would it work for her? She tilted her head. Wouldn't know, she said. She'd never been married. He smiled and went for it. But you're dating a married man. Mara looked at him without flinching. I'm dating a man who's divorcing, she said. The table went quiet. Clara's face drained. She repeated the word like it hadn't landed right the first time. Divorcing? Her voice cracked on it. What is she talking about, Ethan? I told her about the papers I'd filed 2 months ago, sitting at my attorney's office with her name on them. She said she never agreed to any divorce. I said she agreed to open the marriage. I agreed to give her whatever she wanted, and while she was doing that, I was preparing to leave. She called it manipulation. I said manipulation is convincing your husband he isn't enough while spending your evenings with your life coach. Evan shifted in his chair and reached for his composed session leader voice. Told us to take a breath, said strong emotions cloud judgment. I looked at him and told him to save that for his paying clients. Mara quietly set her fork down, said it was time for her to go, thanked Clara for a genuinely enlightening evening, and stood. Evan didn't offer his hand, just nodded stiffly. I walked her to the door. She asked if I was okay. Better than I've been in years, I said. She kissed me and left. Clara was on the couch when I came back in, crying. Evan sat beside her looking like he was already calculating his exit strategy. I told Clara simply, I deserve to be happy, and you showed me that wasn't going to happen with you. She said she still loved me. I told her she loved the idea of having me. Evan stood and announced it felt like a private moment. Clara spun on him. He shrugged, said she needed space to process, and that they'd talk tomorrow. Then he walked out. She stared at the closed door. Something shifted in her expression right then. Some first real flicker of realizing she didn't have control of this anymore. I told her the divorce split was fair. 50-50, she could keep the house. I'd already found an apartment. She said she didn't want a divorce. I told her that wasn't up to her anymore. She asked if it was because of Mara. I said it was because of me. Mara came after. The decision came the night Clara told me to do whatever I wanted. She didn't respond. I gathered the plates, packed up the leftover food, it was too good to waste, and turned off the lights. When I came back to the living room, she'd gone upstairs behind a closed door. I took the guest room. Cooper followed and settled at my feet. My phone buzzed. A text from Mara. Thank you for letting me be part of your life tonight. Sleep well. For the first time in months, I did. Wait, let me jump in for a second. Because I want to make sure everyone caught what just happened at that dinner table. He didn't raise his voice. He cooked everyone a meal, sat down like a normal person, and let one sentence from Mara flip the entire board. I'm dating a man who's divorcing. 6 words. Clara went pale. Evan, who walked in like he owned the room, crawled out without even shaking anyone's hand. That is what happens when someone with actual composure walks into a situation where everyone else was depending on chaos to stay in control. Now things are about to get considerably more interesting. 3 days went by. Clara stayed upstairs. She hadn't signed anything. I could hear her through the ceiling. Sometimes crying, sometimes sharp-voiced, always on the phone. Always Evan. Then Lucas called. Said he needed me to come by his office. Something about Evan that I should see in person. When I got there, he had a thick folder on his desk. He told me to sit down. Said he'd started looking into Evan after his wife mentioned 2 women from Clara's group had been approached about putting money into some kind of expansion project. His fraud compliance background gave him access to public records most people never think to pull. Evan Cross wasn't a real name. His actual name was Eric Dawson. Changed it 8 years ago following a civil fraud lawsuit filed in Florida. Same setup, same structure. Personal development group, mostly married women. Same language about potential and growth and changing the world together. He'd convinced multiple women to invest in an expansion fund. The fund dissolved, and so did he. 7 documented victims. Probably more who never said anything publicly. He'd avoided criminal charges every time by structuring everything as voluntary donations to a mission, rather than investments with stated returns. Predatory, but slippery enough to keep him out of a courtroom. I asked to keep the folder. Lucas said it was mine. Then he leaned back and told me to think carefully about what I was going to do with it. He pointed out that the divorce was already in motion. My finances were already separated, and in a few months I'd be free and clear. Why add complications? Because even if Clara hurt me, I said, I'm not going to sit here while she loses $50,000 to a fraud. Lucas gave me a long look. Said I was either a saint or an idiot, and probably both. That night I showed Mara the folder at her apartment. She went through every page slowly and carefully. When she set it down, she said the man was a predator. I know, I said. She asked if I was going to tell Clara. I said I was thinking about it. She told me something I didn't want to hear but already knew. It wasn't my responsibility anymore. Clara's first instinct would be denial. I'd become the guy who'd forged documents to destroy her relationship. Let him dig his own grave, she said. People like him always do. I knew she was right, but I couldn't sit still with it. I called my attorney Richard and asked to accelerate the process. Specifically, I wanted the financial division finalized before any marital assets could be redirected to third parties. Richard said he'd file to expedite it, but Clara still needed to sign. I told him I'd handle that part. When I got home that evening, Clara was in the kitchen for the first time in days. She said Evan believed we should try to work things out, that he'd admitted he pushed her too far, that he only wanted what was best for her. I asked her directly, "Has Evan asked you for money?" Her expression shifted immediately. She said it was none of my business. I said that was a yes. She called it an investment, his program expanding to other cities, a real opportunity. I asked how much. She looked away. 50,000, she said quietly. She just needed a few more days to move the funds. I went to my briefcase and put the folder on the table in front of her. She read it slowly. Confusion first, then resistance, then something that looked like quiet panic trying to hold its shape. She said it was fake. I walked her through the dates, the names, the timeline. A woman named Sandra Miller had lost $70,000. Her contact information was on the last page. Clara could call her directly if she had doubts. She stared at the papers for a long time. Then she asked why I was showing her this. Because even if I don't love you the way I used to, I said, I'm not going to watch you get cleaned out. She went quiet. After a while, she said she needed to think. I told her to take all the time she needed. Just don't move that money. I went to the guest room. Cooper followed. An hour later, I heard the front door open and close. Hold on 1 second, because this is the part I want to sit with. He didn't have to do this. The divorce was moving, his finances were clean, and if Clara handed over $50,000, that was legally no longer his problem. He had every reason to let it play out and call it justice. But he went and got that folder and put it in front of her anyway. Not because he owed her anything, but because he could look himself in the mirror. That is a completely different kind of strength than anything else we've talked about in this story. Now let's see what Clara actually does with it. 2 days passed with no word. Then I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. A woman named Melissa, someone from Clara's group. She said Clara was at her house and asked me to come. 20 minutes later, I was at the door. Melissa told me Clara hadn't eaten since the previous day. She'd confronted Evan with the folder. He denied everything, said I'd forged it to drive a wedge between them. But Clara had done something none of the other women in the group had ever had the nerve to do. She called Sandra Miller directly. They talked for 2 hours. Sandra confirmed every detail. Same promises, same lines, same manufactured intimacy, even the same restaurant he'd taken all of them to. Clara was completely shattered. I knocked softly on the guest room door, said it was me. A few seconds of silence, then it opened. She looked hollowed out. Hair undone, pale, no makeup. She looked at me and said, "You were right. I'm sorry." I told her not to apologize. She said she'd been an idiot. Said Sandra had repeated Evan's exact words back to her. "You're special. I've never met anyone like you. We're going to change the world together." Like a script pulled from storage. He did have a script, I said. She sat on the edge of the bed. I stayed in the doorway, giving her room. She said what hurt most wasn't the money, and wasn't even the betrayal. It was realizing how easy it had been. She thought she was getting stronger. She was just getting further under someone else's control. Melissa had pulled together 6 of the women the night before. Every single one had the same story. 2 had already sent him money. They'd looked into reporting it, but couldn't find a clean legal angle. He'd never documented any promised returns. Everything was structured as belief in a mission, hard to prosecute. I asked what she was going to do now. She said she didn't know, couldn't go back, couldn't pretend the last 18 months were nothing. I told her they weren't nothing. She'd still learned something. She let out a short, broken laugh and asked what she could possibly have learned from all of this. "That you're human," I said. "That anyone can be fooled. It doesn't make you weak. It makes you someone who trusted the wrong person." She looked at me for a moment. Then she said, "I'm going to sign the papers." I asked if she was sure. She said yes. She said we'd ended a long time before any of this started. She just hadn't let herself see it. I told her she didn't need to rush. She said she wasn't rushing. She was finally stopping. 2 weeks later, we were at Richard's office. Clara arrived exactly on time. Plain gray sweater, jeans, no performance. She looked tired and grounded and more like herself than she had in years. Before she picked up the pen, she looked at me and said she wasn't fighting for anything. The 50-50 split was fair, and she knew it. She wanted to apologize for everything. I told her to save it. She signed every page with a steady hand, set the pen down. Exhaled. Richard gathered the papers. We walked outside into cold November air. She told me she'd found an apartment near her office, that the group was still meeting but had turned itself into a real support circle instead of a seminar. She was thinking about going back to finish her graduate program in organizational psychology. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. We both caught it at the same time and gave a short, quiet laugh. She asked if I was serious about Mara. "Very," I said. She asked about my family. I told her we'd had dinner with my parents the week before. My dad liked Mara immediately. She smiled faintly. "Your dad never liked me," she said. I told her he just saw things I hadn't been ready to look at. We shook hands. No tears, no lingering. 2 people closing a long, painful chapter and walking in opposite directions. Okay, pause. I want to say something about that handshake, because it matters. No dramatic speech, no final attempt to leave an impression, no crying in the parking lot. Just 2 adults who'd been through something genuinely rough, wrapped it up like civilized people, and walked away clean. That is not coldness. That is what real closure actually looks like. He didn't need the last word. He didn't need her to fall apart. He already had everything he needed, had it for months, and what comes next? What comes next is the whole point of the story. Final update. That same evening, I had people over for the first time since Clara moved out. Lucas and his wife, and Mara. We cooked together, pasta, salad, garlic bread, and the house felt different from the moment everyone walked through the door. Warmer. Something that had been tightly wound in that space for years had finally let go. Lucas raised his glass and told me I looked better than I had in months. I told him I felt it. The evening was easy. Good conversation, music on low in the background, Cooper going from person to person collecting attention like it was his full-time assignment. After everyone left, Mara and I sat on the couch with half-finished mugs of coffee. She said she'd noticed something that night. Said it was the first time she'd seen me fully at rest. No tension, not checking my phone every 5 minutes. I told her it was the first time in a while I had nothing left hanging over me. She asked, "What are we, Ethan? Where do we actually stand?" I set my mug down. Told her these past months had been the best I'd had in years. Not because everything was easy, but because everything was real. The way she listened, the way she showed up, the way she always pulled the focus back to what I actually wanted every single time. I told her I wanted to make it official. She raised an eyebrow. "Are you asking me to be your girlfriend like we're teenagers?" "Exactly like that," I said. She laughed, that low, easy laugh I'd come to count on, and said yes. Then her tone shifted. She said there was something she needed to tell me. Evan had shown up outside her clinic the previous week, just stood there watching through the window. When she walked out to confront him, he left without a word. I told her that wasn't something to brush off. She said she'd already installed security cameras and filed a police report. She was calm about it in a way I wasn't, and she told me not to make any moves. Said people like him growl when they lose control, but they don't act. He was testing to see if he could rattle her. He hadn't. I believed her. But I didn't sleep great that night. A week later, Lucas called while I was eating breakfast. He told me to turn on the news. There was Evan on the screen. Or rather, Eric Dawson. Walking out of an office building in handcuffs, 2 federal agents on either side, cameras firing, reporters calling his name. The anchor's voice cut through the noise. Self-proclaimed life coach Eric Dawson arrested on fraud charges spanning 4 states, dozens of victims, nearly $500,000. A woman from the group named Rebecca had a brother who happened to be an attorney. He'd gone looking for more victims beyond the local ones and found them: Arizona, Colorado, Nevada. A woman in Colorado had recorded Evan explicitly promising financial returns on an investment. That was the crack. That made it criminal. I called Clara immediately. She'd already seen it. Her voice sounded different, clearer, more grounded than it had been in a year and a half. She said if I hadn't shown her those documents, she would have given him the money, all $50,000. I said, but she didn't. There was a pause. Then she said, "No, I didn't." That evening, Mara and I had dinner at her apartment. Roast chicken, simple and perfect. She asked how I felt. Relieved, I said, but strange, like when a storm finally passes and you keep half expecting more thunder. She reached across the table and touched my hand. She said sometimes things actually get better. Let them. A week before Christmas, Clara texted asking if we could meet for coffee. Just to talk. I went. She was already there, sitting by the window. She pushed a paper bag toward me when I sat down. Inside was a small box. I opened it. My grandfather's watch, the one I'd assumed was gone when I moved out. She'd found it while packing. She knew exactly what it meant to me. There was an envelope too. Photos. Our wedding, some vacations, snapshots from the years when things were still good. 2 people who thought love alone could hold anything together. I told her to keep them. She said they weren't hers to keep anymore. She said she'd been going to the support circle regularly, that she'd enrolled back in her graduate program, organizational psychology. She was doing the real work now, the kind that didn't require anyone else to hand her a framework. She said she'd finally stopped outsourcing her own growth. She asked if I was serious about Mara. Very, I said. She nodded and said, "Don't lose her. Don't make the same mistake I did, thinking there's always time to appreciate what's in front of you." We shook hands properly on the way out, not the hollow formality of a legal office, but an actual goodbye. I left holding my grandfather's watch. The December air was cold and sharp. For the first time in longer than I could clearly remember, I wasn't carrying any bitterness about any of it, just free. 6 months later, I moved to Tennessee. It wasn't impulsive. Mara and I had talked about it for weeks. She had her clinic there, her family, her whole life already built. I had a job that could go remote and no real reason to stay where I was. So I packed what actually mattered, sold the house, and drove south with Cooper riding shotgun. We stopped at a small motel on the way down that allowed dogs. 2 days of long stretches of highway, music on low, windows cracked, Cooper asleep with his chin on the armrest. The kind of road trip you picture when you imagine actually starting over. When we pulled up to the farm, Mara was waiting on the porch. She said, "Welcome home." 3 words, meant everything. The first months were an adjustment. Tennessee was slower, greener, quieter than I was used to. At first I missed the noise. Then I started wondering why I'd ever needed it in the first place. I found work with an engineering firm out of Nashville. 3 days a week in the office, the rest from home. Mara and I moved into a small ranch house about 20 minutes from her clinic. Cooper walked outside every morning like he'd never been so happy in his entire life. Acres of land, a pond, other dogs down the road to argue with. He was 7 and acting like a completely different animal. I'd forgotten what it looked like to watch something just be fully happy without any complicated reason behind it. One afternoon, I was fixing a fence section when Mara's father, Tom, walked over and handed me a glass of iced tea. Told me to take a break. We sat on the porch steps and watched the sun drop behind the tree line. After a while, he said he liked that I didn't try too hard. Said most guys show up needing to prove something. Said I just did what was right, and let that be enough. I told him I'd already learned what happens when you spend all your energy proving yourself to the wrong person. He nodded slowly. Said his daughter picked a good one this time. A few weeks later, Mara and I were eating on the porch watching the fireflies come out when she set her plate down and said she had something to tell me. Her tone made me put mine down too. She reached into her pocket and put a small box on the table, then told me she'd gone to the doctor that day. Her eyes were wet and she was smiling wider than I'd ever seen. She was pregnant. 8 weeks. I sat there for a moment. Then I kissed her before she could finish whatever she was about to say next. When we finally came up for air, she laughed through the tears. "So that's a yes? That's an absolutely yes," I said. We didn't sleep much that night. We talked for hours. Names, rooms, how everything was going to change, what comes next. Cooper slept at our feet, completely unbothered, not yet aware his world was about to get considerably louder. 2 weeks later, I proposed. By the pond where we'd had our first real Tennessee evening together. She looked at me and asked if I was doing it because of the baby. I told her I'd already been planning it. The baby just moved my timeline forward. She asked what timeline. I said the rest of my life. She said yes. We married in September in her parents' backyard. Small ceremony. Close friends and family. Exactly right. Lucas was my best man. His wife cried through the entire thing without apology. Clara wasn't there, but she sent a short message that morning. "Congratulations, Ethan. I wish you all the happiness in the world." I replied with 2 words. "Thank you." Our son was born in February. 7 pounds, completely healthy, loud from the first second. We named him Thomas, after Mara's father, who went very quiet when we told him and stepped outside for a few minutes to check on something. I held him in that hospital room and felt something shift inside me. Not just love, clarity. Every choice I'd made over the past 2 years, every hard night in that guest room wondering how my life had come apart, every deliberate move I'd made instead of reacting. It had a straight line pointing right here. Mara was exhausted and completely radiant. She asked what I was thinking. I told her that 2 years ago I was sleeping in a guest room, wondering how everything had fallen apart. And now I had everything I hadn't even known to look for. She said, "You deserve it." Later that night, after she'd fallen asleep, I stepped into the hallway to get some air. My phone buzzed. Lucas. He said, "Did you see the news? Evan got sentenced. 7 years." I stared at the screen for a moment, then typed back, "Justice. Late, but justice." I put the phone in my pocket and went back into the room. Thomas against Mara's chest. Sunrise starting outside the window. 2 years earlier, Clara had looked at me across our dinner table and said, "Do whatever you want, Ethan." She figured I'd stay put and wait. Instead, I did exactly what she said. I rebuilt from scratch. I found something real. I let the consequences take care of themselves. And they did. Every single one. Evan was behind bars. Clara was rebuilding her life on her own terms. And I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Cooper lifted his head from the floor, looked at me, and thumped his tail twice. I told him everything was fine, buddy. He sighed, closed his eyes, and went back to sleep. And that is the full story of a man who took his wife at her word and ran straight with it. No rage spiral, no revenge scheme, no begging. Just a guy who made his moves quietly, built something better while no one was watching, and let the whole situation sort itself out without lifting a finger to make it happen. Drop a comment. Would you have shown Clara those documents, or let Evan take everything and called it karma? Either answer is valid, and I want to hear where you land. Hit subscribe if you want more stories like this one. New ones drop every week, and they don't disappoint.